What if the solution to student disengagement isn't in the classroom, but just outside of it? Across the country, educators are discovering that outdoor learning, hands on projects, and real world connections aren't just nice add ons, they're essential. And no one understands that better than today's guest, who believes that the key to transforming education might lie in our national parks, our local history, and the untapped power of collaboration. Hey, everybody, I'm Steven Schauer. Welcome to Stories Sustain Us, the show where personal journeys and bold ideas meet to spark change and sustainability in our communities. In today's episode, we meet James Fester, a lifelong educator, curriculum innovator, and advocate for outdoor and project-based learning. From early childhood trips to national parks to leading global teacher training for UNESCO, James has reimagined what learning can look like when we step outside the four walls of a traditional classroom. We talk about the power of inquiry, why collaboration with park rangers and community experts matters, and how embracing local history can help students connect more deeply with their world. James shares his experiences bringing students to Washington, D.C., partnering with the National Park Service, and writing the National Park Classroom, a book that's quickly becoming a must-read for forward-thinking educators. Whether you're a teacher, a parent, or simply someone who cares about the future of education and sustainability, this conversation will leave you hopeful and energized. James Fester brings more than 2 decades of experience across public, private, and online schools. His career includes roles as a classroom teacher, instructional coach, technology director, and curriculum specialist. He's a member of the national faculty at PBLWorks, where he helps educators worldwide embrace project-based learning. James is also a Google certified innovator, National Geographic grantee, and a published author whose latest book, The National Park Classroom, was released globally by ISTE in 2024. His impact stretches beyond school systems. James is a facilitator for UNESCO, a frequent contributor to platforms like Edutopia and ISTE, and a public lands professional who works at every level of park education. From his work with the Teacher Ranger Teacher program to helping national and state parks reimagine how they engage learners, James is bridging the gap between classrooms and the natural world. So, how can teachers spark curiosity and civic responsibility using the world just beyond their school doors? Let's find out with James Fester here on Stories Sustain Us, where we are inspiring action through the power of storytelling. James, how you doing? Welcome to Stories Sustain Us. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Stephen. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you for reaching out. I mentioned in the introduction that you had actually contacted me, and I looked into your website and everything, and I was like, I got to talk to this guy. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. I generally start off asking everybody, where are they from? So I'm over here in Seattle, and it's actually a beautiful day in Seattle for a change. Got some sun this weekend. So where are you, and what's it like where you are?
Yeah, so I am currently living in St. Paul, Minnesota. I do not have the very fun and interesting accent because I'm actually originally from the Pacific Coast myself. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area and lived in California most of my life until one day I fell madly in love with a girl from Minneapolis. And now here I am living in St. Paul where the air hurts your face 6 months out of the year. But it's been actually a really fantastic move. And although I do miss, obviously, the things that I kind of took for granted when I lived in California, like access to the mountains and the ocean and all that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great stuff here too. So it was actually a really positive move. And I love where I live, which is great.
Right on. One, and who you're living with, no doubt, as well.
Very true. Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, I'm looking forward to jumping into your story. There's a lot I want to hear about, your connection to the United Nations and National Geographic, and obviously your book, The National Park Classroom. But let's jump into your life. You just mentioned San Francisco and the West Coast is where you grew up. So tell me a little bit about your childhood and what life was like for you growing up.
So I think the two things that are really important, or the two things that come to mind when I talk about my childhood are, one, that I was raised by 2 public school teachers. And so it was pretty obvious very early on what I was going to be doing with my life. It was going to be involved in education. And because I lived in such close proximity to two really fantastic public school teachers, that was kind of what I thought I was going to do. That my definition of what education was, or what it meant to be an educator, was you get your credential, you get in a classroom, and then you spend your life doing that, and then eventually you retire, and there you go, boom, that's Yahtzee. And that's kind of what I thought, and it was the plan. Ever since I was, I think, in the 6th grade. I remember actually very clearly during my 6th grade year, we had our first career day, and I looked all through the career day catalog, and the one job that was not available to go and listen to was teacher. And I was pretty irate about that and said, like, why would I waste my time going and seeing all of these other things when I know what I want to do? And I believe I was sent home by the principal. So I felt very strongly about what I was going to be doing. And to this day, I joke that when people ask me what I do, I jokingly say I inherited the family business.
Yeah. What grades did your parents teach, if you don't mind me asking?
No, of course. Yeah. My father was a high school teacher. He taught chemistry and life sciences pretty much throughout his career at the high school level. And my mother, it was actually kind of an interesting trajectory. She started out actually teaching at the collegiate level. She was in the physical education discipline, and she taught at the collegiate level in the state college system. And then when my brother and I came along, she kind of took a break for a little bit, but then eventually went back and got really interested in special education and did that for the last part of her career. So it was so she taught, arguably you could say, K-16. And then I ended up going into middle school. I had absolutely no intention of doing middle school. It was the worst time of my life in many ways, but I had a couple of teachers who were very, very important in making sure that I stayed on track and stayed successful. And so I think that may have stuck with me. And so when I essentially started to look for jobs, I was very lucky to serendipitously find a position at a school district, and it was a middle school position, and so I took it, and I could not imagine teaching any other age. I
always hear that's like a tough age to teach. Yeah.
I think it's really fortunate that there are people like me in the world that are like really passionate about teaching middle school. But it's funny because I feel the same way about my wife is a preschool teacher, and I feel the same way about teaching preschool. I'm like, I don't even know where you would begin with that. Like, what's the curriculum?
All of it, actually.
I know. Yeah. And she thinks I'm kind of out of my mind thinking that teenagers are fun, and I think she's crazy chasing toddlers around. So it works very well. I think it's a good balance. But
great.
But yeah, that's what I ended up doing.
Yeah. Well, we definitely need people like you and your wife in the world because I love teachers and the important role that they play. But yeah, imagining myself in a room full of toddlers or a room full of 12-year-olds all day would be something I imagine I could pull off, but something that in the back of my mind I'd be going, this is probably not what I want to be doing.
This may not be my calling. So that's the one thing to know about my childhood is it just revolved around education. Like, the academic year was the calendar year, and that was just the way that we planned everything. And the other thing that's really important for people to know is the strong connection I always have had to the outdoors. When I was growing up, I had two parents that were public school teachers, so we didn't have oodles and oodles of money to spend on exotic vacations, places, and things like that. So we would do a lot of camping and a lot of car camping. And I actually didn't know until I was very young, or until I was a little bit older, I didn't know that when you went on vacation, that didn't actually just mean camping, because that's all we did.
Me too.
I didn't know that other people did other things. And I remember being really confused when I had a friend one year who said, like, oh, what'd you do for vacation? Oh, I went on a cruise. And I sat there thinking, like, how the heck do you pitch a boat on a tent? That doesn't make any sense. And it was only then that I realized that there are a lot of other things that you can do. But again, like, I never felt like I was missing out on anything. I never felt like it was something that I was like, we never did these other kinds of things, because for me, that was my ultimate. There was nothing that I would rather do than go stay out in the woods and get to explore places. And we went to national parks a lot, specifically Yosemite. That was, I jokingly kind of referred to that as my backyard growing up, because we were there like clockwork almost every spring before like the park really opened and before like all of the
got too crowded.
There's no off seasons anymore in parks like that, but back in the day there was, and that was the off season, and we would have the place almost to ourselves. Sometimes things were still closed because of snow, but I just remember it being an incredibly formative part of my life, and something that I always wanted to make sure remained that way, which is kind of what brought me to all of the work that I've done recently, which is really kind of exploring more about what that means and what it means to ensure that these places are sustained and continue to be valued. Because without people like you and me and the folks that are listening, they would not exist and they will not exist. And so it's really important to make sure people understand what they are. Exactly.
Absolutely. So you're adamant in 6th grade about your future, and moving on into the high school years that obviously didn't change direction. And outdoors, I have a similar, my family didn't come from a great deal of means either, comfortable middle class kind of family, but we did a lot of camping and outdoor activities like you did. So what was high school like as you were preparing to move on to this career of education? Were you kind of already that focused on it in high school, and you kind of knew where you were going to go to college and onward, or did it kind of just unfold for you as life often does?
I was still pretty sure about what I was going to do. That hadn't changed. The exact pathway to get there was the thing that I didn't quite know. I didn't have any idea where I was going to go to school. I mean, the nice thing about going into education, at least in a state like California, is that you basically could choose almost every college that I could have chosen would have some sort of education program. I mean, the state college system in California was originally set up as a network of teachers colleges. So like, that's still very much a part of the DNA. And so I knew I was like, I basically got to pick a city. And I one of the things that I did that was really smart, was that I didn't rush it, and that I spent 2 years going to a junior college, which I know not everybody would probably say that that's like something that is their definition of success, but for me it really was, and there was a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the things that I did for the first 2 years would have been the same things that I did at a 4-year institution for the same 2 years. They just cost absolutely next to nothing. I mean, I still cannot believe that, like, I look at the price of how the price of college has risen, and I tell people that, oh yeah, when I first started going to school, I was paying $11 a unit, and they all transferred, and it was, I would pay in cash, or like in the change that I had in my car sometimes if I wanted to take an extra unit or a lab course or something. But what was especially important about that junior college was that because there wasn't the same, I don't want to say obsession, but because there wasn't the same emphasis on people declaring a major and kind of sticking with it, and when you're doing your first 2 years, that there's not always a ton of pressure, but in some places they're very much like, what's your major going to be and why, you got to get you on this track. But at a JC, because there isn't that same kind of, the focus is much more on transitioning and preparing you well for the next chapter, which is transitioning to a 4-year university. I was able to do all sorts of things that I never would have gotten to do, I think, at a state or a university. Like I got to go and run the astronomy lab. I got to manage technical theater productions. I got to do, I got to help put on school events. I got to do all of these things that I never would have been able to do otherwise. Number one, because I was living at home and I didn't have to support myself. But number two, they're just like really open to that. And I also had, without a doubt, some of the best teachers I've ever had in my life. I know that this is not at all the truth, or it is not this is a big and broad generalization, but sometimes when you go to those higher ed universities, the emphasis isn't always on, for the individual professors, it's not necessarily on teaching or instruction as much as it's on other things like research and things like that.
Publication, getting
publisher parish
track.
And I get that. I understand that. That, it's not always the case, because I had some fantastic teachers later on in my career as well. But the folks that were at the JC a lot of them were much, much more interested in the student experience and the student interaction and what was going on in the classroom. And so I got some like really fantastic folks that I was then able to emulate later on and kind of do that. And that was really great. And it set me up well. Like, the nice thing about, and I think this is still the case, but one of the really nice things about starting at a JC and then going into the state or university system is that you sit down with the counselors and the staff. The counseling staff at the school was exceptional. And you sit down and you say, here's what I want to do and here's where I think I want to go. And they basically just say, this is what you have to do over the next 2 years. And these are the scores that you need to get. And then you're basically guaranteed to go in and everything will transfer.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing, you know? And it took a lot of the edge off me because I basically just had to hit those marks and had a little bit of wiggle room too, which was nice. But I did what I had to do. I got out and then I ended up down in Southern California because I just decided I wanted to live in a different part of the state and ended up at Cal State Long Beach. Mostly because, again, like I didn't really, I had a lot of choice and I didn't really feel pressured to choose one way or the other. And I remembered they had a really fun blue pyramid as their gym and that looked cool. So I went there.
Those are the choices.
Not
we
exactly,
make.
not exclusively, but like I would be lying if I didn't say that one stuck out in my head
Had some influence.
I did think that was like kind of cool and interesting, and it made me want to investigate
the rest of the place has got to be kind of interesting if they got this cool thing going on there.
Yeah, if you have I believe it was at the time the third largest pyramid in North America. Or maybe the third largest pyramid in the United States. I think that's probably more accurate. Like, why not? Like, let's check it out.
Yeah, it worked out.
It did work out very well, and it was a good choice. I think it was really a good choice to just live in a different part of the state and get down into and to kind of experience the Southern California of it all, just to the access to all sorts of different things down there. And that is actually also where my definition of what an educator is really started to broaden, because I started to get involved with what shall we say, informal educational institutions. I started volunteering at historic sites and the county parks, and really got involved in investigating and learning more about the state park system. And that's really where I started to kind of think like, oh, you know what? There is more than being an educator. Doesn't just mean sitting in a classroom.
Right.
And there's a heck of a lot of interesting and remarkable things that folks that are educators on our public lands or are educators at places like zoos and aquariums do in service of their educational imperative that are worth knowing about. And I do think really helped me when I eventually transitioned into the classroom. I took a lot of that with me, and it gave me, I think in a lot of ways, a little bit of a leg up when I was dealing with some of the challenges that come with teaching in a classroom.
Yeah, keeping kids' attention at that age is definitely requires, I'm sure, a wide array of skills, and taking those outdoor experiences and how to keep people engaged in an outdoor space where their eyes can wander even further than just the four walls of a classroom.
For sure.
That makes a lot of sense. Of sense. So did you focus on a particular, I mean, obviously going into middle school, you weren't necessarily, well, I guess I don't know. I'm going to ask the question, like, what was your educational focus? Did you, end up in social studies or math or, chemistry like your father? Where did you end up going?
No, I ended up going into into social studies and history. And that was my area of interest. I was always kind of interested in that. And then as I got older, it turned out to be one of the subjects that I was always really consistently good at too. And so I kind of took that as like, okay, that's a sign that maybe this is the direction I go. But I was very lucky that what I taught was also my area, it was my passion, which isn't always the case for educators. But for me, it definitely was. It was what I really enjoyed. I really liked it. I could talk about history all day long and really kind of got into that. I think a lot of people later on in life rediscover history and rediscover those kinds of things as a hobby, and kind of come back to it. And so but I kind of never left. It's just kind of what I did. When we would go on vacations, we would always end up at historic places and like on this site on this day near this rock this happened, and of course I wanted to read just all of them and take pictures of all of the plaques. It's something that is a never-ending source of eye rolls, I think, today for my wife when we're driving on a car trip. I'm like, oh wait, there's a marker up here, pull over. And she's like, again, like, are we really gonna do this? And I'm like, yeah, we are, pull over. And
I fight that urge often.
Those kinds of things. It's like, I gotta know what happened. And like so
wonderful. So going in then into the classroom, did you leave right from college and go right into the classroom, or was there other things in between?
No, pretty much that
You
was my goal,
straight
was
into it.
to just go as fast as I could to get
Yeah.
my classroom and do it, because that's really where I thought I was going to be spending my time, and I was really really wanted to um, get it done as soon as possible. And so I did. I went right in. I got a job at a school district in Northern California, in a tiny little town called Larkspur, which is just basically, I think it's a 30-minute drive north of the Golden Gate Bridge
Okay.
once you leave San Francisco.
Yeah.
And really lucked out. Had a fantastic administrator who, for whatever reason, decided that I was the one that he wanted to hire, despite being completely unqualified and having no experience, and all of the other people that were applying for the job coming in with resumes that were a yard long. It was really it was a very important moment in my life that I got chosen.
Yeah.
Um, which should, yeah, like I got that chance, that he gave me that
Got that
chance,
break
and
you
I
needed.
think,
Yeah.
yeah, and I think I did, and I really thrived there. It was really great. I really enjoyed it. I got to do all of the history stuff that I had been ready, like, learning about my entire life. I got opportunities to do things like take our kiddos, our students, on their 8th grade trip to Washington D.C. every year, and I
Oh,
got to do
nice.
that. So I got opportunities to really see, to do which, like, on paper, if you look, like, I look back at what I did, and it's still it was one of my favorite parts of the year. But, like, taking 87 teenagers across the country for a week and having to, like, monitor them and make sure they don't do anything crazy, getting them through airport security and making sure they didn't get lost and I mean, it just, like, it really does sound to some people like nightmare fuel, but
It
for me
sounds
it
like an
was
adventure.
fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
it
an
was. It
adventure.
definitely was. But it was also great too, because I think, and this is something that I would say about just education in general, is that um, getting students outside of a classroom and giving them opportunities to learn or do the work of learning outside of a classroom is really key. And that's something that this taught me, because the students who gave me the hardest time were the biggest disruptions, the ones that I butted head with the most, were always, like, without exception, the best travelers and the best behaved and most capable ones when I got them out of the classroom. It
Yeah.
never failed. And, like, I would come back and I would tell my fellow teachers, I'd be like, such and such, he was really awesome. He stepped up. He was always on time. He was helping people with their bags. You get him out of an environment like a classroom environment, a traditional classroom environment, which is not setting him up for success, and you get
Yeah.
him
You
somewhere
just have a
else.
different mindset, right?
And it was great too, because it also helped me really shift my relationship and change my mind about them too. If I had not done that, if that student had not gone on that trip
Sure.
with me, I would have just always seen them as the troublemaker, the pain
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the rear, the
The
one that was
difficult
always
student.
trying.
Right.
Exactly. And that
Right.
just and so I think it was really important, not just from
That's
a
wonderful.
relationship standpoint, but giving them an opportunity to learn in a way that works better for them. Because for some people, non-formal learning or free choice learning, or whatever you want to call it, the stuff that is characteristic of the methodology used in places like national parks and museums and things like that.
Yeah.
That's the way that they learn. That's the natural form
Yeah.
of learning, and it's better. And they can't handle the rigidity and the structure of, like, lecture, test, lecture, test. It's just, it's tough, and we
Yeah.
have to recognize, and I wish that I had a better answer for it, but we need to recognize that some students are just not going to be successful learning like that, and we need to provide other opportunities to make sure that we
Yeah.
are using pedagogies and methodologies that work for them.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means getting them out of the classroom,
Yeah. Absolutely. So, taking kids to DC, I'm imagining here then that part of your curriculum as a middle school teacher in California was U.S. history, as well as, I'm assuming, California history. Is a little bit of blend of both?
Not as much the California history, although I do love that, which is really
Yeah.
weird for a guy who, it's a really weird thing for somebody who now lives in Minnesota to say that I love California history, but I do. It's just, it's still fantastic. And there'll always be a part of me that never really leaves that state. Like, it's
Yeah,
just,
sure.
it's just, I have family there. I go back with my kids now, and we visit a couple times a year, and I take them and get to do all these things with them. I want them to experience that part of I want them to be able to explore the California part, even though they were born and raised in Minnesota, and I don't want them to lose that connection.
Yeah.
But U.S. history was definitely the focus. I taught mostly 8th grade, and in that you kind of start at about the end of the American Revolution and go up until the beginning of World War I. That's what you're supposed to do. Nobody ever makes it that far because there's just too much to do and too much to go through. But that's more or less the focus. And so it was like kind of the perfect time to really take them to our nation's capital, where they can basically see where it all happened and everything in the museums, because they're literally immersed in it. And some kids, they totally got turned on by that, like having to spend weeks and weeks learning about the Constitution, and then you actually get to go and sit in on a session of the legislative branch and watch how the sausage gets made. For some of them, it was absolutely like, it kind of left them a little bit jaded, but for some of them it was really interesting, because it turns out that, like, I don't know if you've ever seen a legislative session, but it's they're not, I'm sorry, representatives, but like, y'all don't work very effectively, and there's lots of yelling, and there's not it really was the kid. Like, I turned around and I saw my 8th graders watching this. They're sitting up in the gallery looking down at this floor vote. I think they were voting on the naming of a post office or something really innocuous. And I turn around and I look at them, and there's this group of girls who never ever stop talking in my classroom, and they're sitting there with their mouths hanging open, and they're just slack-jawed, and they look at me, they're like, oh my God, they are the worst ever. Like, how are they getting anything done, Mr. Fester? And like, they were horrified at what they were seeing. And we had to have it was a great learning moment, because we had a long discussion about, well, okay, you're just seeing one part of it. There's work that goes on in committee. There's a lot of people that support them. And it's like they have a staff that kind of helps them craft the legislation. It's not just them, but they were just like all of
it is a mess.
Their faith in our democracy was teetering on the edge. I think I brought some of them back, but they were just like, I can see why nothing ever gets done.
It's having spent most of the last 25 years either at city council meetings, state legislatures, or up in
That's
D.C.
Right, you have that proximity, so you kind of know a little bit of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I've seen plenty of legislative bodies in action, and that is. Not just a audience member reaction from a 12 or 13-year-old perspective, but sometimes it's an adult staffer perspective too. You're kind of going, that's where we wound up on this issue. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a very telling thing when the group of teenage girls that never stop talking say that you're talking too much, you're too disruptive, and you need to get back to work. I think you need to kind of re-examine the way that your your systems and the way things are running. That's a pretty tough criticism to come back from.
That is something to put some thought into. Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I love going to D.C. I don't know that I could live or work there, but I've gone there plenty of times for work. But I love it for the history of it. I love it. When I'm there to do my meetings or lobby or whatever I'm there to do, to always set aside time to go check out the galleries and the museums and the history that's there, because it is such a fascinating part. It's tremendous what goes on there, and in both the astonishment of how is anything getting done here, and the astonishment of, wow, some pretty important things happen here that could make the world a better place or not, as the case may be, depending on the decisions they make. So it's important that you're taking or we're taking, as the case is, kids there to expose them to that, because that's important. I think my experience growing up in Texas, it's funny that you say California history wasn't maybe that big of a deal in middle school. My recollection was in middle school, all we did was Texas history, because Texas thinks it's its own country. So like middle school history was all about Texas, and I didn't get to like U.S. history until high school. So
they do a little bit of California history, I think, in like the 4th grade. That's when they kind of hit it hard. But sometimes it's an elective in high school. It was never. I never went to a school that it was offered there. I would have loved to see it, because I really do think. I think there's something, and there's definitely something to being able to learn the stories of the places that you live and learn about what went on there. I think that that's a really important thing. I think it also makes I think there's also a better connection that can be made, instead of saying like, this event we're talking about happened way over there, saying like, this event that we're talking about happened literally on the ground you're standing on, or you drive by where it happened every day. I mean, that I think there's for students that don't share the same passion that I do in my subject. And again, I was told on many, many occasions, I was reminded that history is one of the boring subjects, quote unquote, that they need some other reason to care. And sometimes proximity is that motivation. Just knowing that like, oh, like that thing we talked about today, it like happened right here, or I can like drive right to where it happened, you know,
and shaped the world I'm living in now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I don't want to jump too fast into the future, but I do want to start transitioning our conversation to getting into your current work. So tell me a little bit about that connection then between, you know, you were a middle school teacher and your journey to getting into, you know, writing books and eventually we want to talk about the National Park classroom book. Obviously that we want to I don't want to dive deep into that, but what's that transition like? I mean, how did you start making that move from classroom to doing more with the parks and, you know, connection with National Geographic and the United Nations? I mean, that I'm assuming didn't all happen when you were in a middle school classroom. So how did you
all the same week, all of that stuff? Just it was a really
my imagination was wrong.
Yes, it was a really busy week. I didn't get a lot of sleep. No, so a couple of things were really key. The first one was that I, as a way of staying connected to the public lands, I was volunteering on the weekends as a volunteer interpreter for California State Parks, specifically Angel Island, which if you are familiar with California, you probably know that there are islands in the middle of the San Francisco Bay. You probably know about Alcatraz, been in the news a little bit recently as well. A little bit. And then there's another one called Angel Island, and that's the one that I worked at. It's the whole island is a state park. And every corner of the island is almost like a different era of history, which is really interesting. And so I'd lived there my entire life, and I had never, ever, ever visited it until I was like 25. You know, it's like, oh, it's there. You know, it's like, it's that thing that unless somebody comes from out of town, you know, I'll go someday. And I went there mostly because I wanted to bring my students there on a field trip. And I met a very nice lady at the gift shop, and she suggested, well, you know, if you become a volunteer, it all becomes easier, and you can come out for free, and you can do all these things. And I'm like, oh, maybe I should do that. So I did.
Good
and
pitch.
I volunteered. Yeah, it was a great pitch. And I volunteered and met, you know, we got trained as a volunteer interpreter by some really fantastic folks that still work in the California State Parks, and started to get exposed to the way that education works outside of a classroom. And it was interesting because what I started to do was during my weekdays, when I was in my brick and mortar school, I taught one way. And then on my weekends, I'd used the principles of interpretation and dialogic exchange and leading with questions and all these things in it that I did differently, because that's what I was taught to do on my weekends. And so I kind of like did this like chameleon thing where I would like kind of shift. And when what I started to do, and I remember I did it for a couple of reasons. Number one is I brought things from Angel Island out into my classroom. Like I had like the full Civil War outfit and the sword and everything, much to the chagrin of my principal. But like I had the whole kit, and the kids thought it was the coolest thing, and like they got to like, you know, hold the sword and wear the outfit and the whole 9 yards, and they thought it was really cool. And so I was like, well, you know, if I'm bringing stuff off of the island, what if I brought like the way I taught off of the island? And I started to do that a little bit more, like kind of just when opportunities arose, or when like we would get to a part of the curriculum that aligned to a program I did, I would just do that program basically as the lesson for the day. And what I saw was that the students in my class, who were the ones that never really wanted to give me the time of day, and the ones that really didn't think that history was interested, the ones that didn't play the game of school well,
Yeah.
were the ones that were most interested in what was going on. And I started to have less and less and less issues with them. Issues or disruptions, or they were
Sure.
more successful by all sorts of measures. The students that were the high achievers are always going to be the high achievers no matter what. The ones in the middle, for the most part, are always pretty, depending on the day of the week or like where the moon is aligned to what planet,
Sure.
they're going to be fine. But the ones that really need the help, the ones that are on the bottom, they're really struggling. Those are the ones that I saw the biggest gains in. And I saw it more and more with that. And so I kind of at that point started to say, I wonder, there must be something to this. And I really started to dive deeper into the idea or these principles, this, this 70 plus year body of knowledge that developed the method of instruction, the method of education that's used by informal educators. And I brought more and more of it into my classroom. The problem was that when I tried to share what I was doing with the other people that I worked with, they didn't really get it.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of those things that like experiencing it really was the part that was missing. And so I knew they weren't going to do that. They weren't going to give up their weekends to come and volunteer with me. So I had to kind of put together a way of taking what was done on public lands or what's done in the parks and bringing that into the classroom in a way that made sense to teachers. And that essentially is what led to the book, because the point of the book is what classroom teachers can learn from what education looks like on our public lands, specifically the National Park Service, because it is the largest and most well-known system of public lands system in the world. So that's why I use that one.
Yeah. I've in my previous career, I had an opportunity to manage and supervise a large department of communicators, and we had an education component. And Carrie Merson and Menopal are rock stars in my world as informal educators, and I'm sure that everything you're talking about, they would eat all this up, and because they got it. So I can appreciate the skill sets that you're bringing into the classroom, because I could witness it in what they were doing, and how they could just wrap the kids up and get their attention in ways that they always received stellar remarks from the teachers that they were coming to work with. So all that resonates with me, even though I don't fully get it and understand it. I know it's a really important tool. So
yeah.
So before we transition into the book, or maybe this is connected to the book, I am super curious about the two aspects of your bio about the facilitator for the United Nations and your National Geographic certified teacher.
Yep.
Can you tell me a little bit about those two things, what they are and how they came about? Because I'm familiar with UNESCO, big fan of what UNESCO does around the world.
Yeah, me too.
And to know that you're connected to that, if you would explain what it is to people and how you got connected to it, and I would appreciate that, and I would love learning myself.
Yeah. So the National Geographic, and this is actually, I'll start with that because this is something that any educator that might be listening to this could actually participate in this themselves. So National Geographic, we all know, probably remember the giant stack of those yellow magazines that were in our grandparents' or parents' houses, and the fun map inserts that were really fun to look at. So they have an educational arm that is that's very active, produces a lot of great stuff. And one of the things that they do is they use what they call they have a bunch of different things, but their main tool for educators is the geographic inquiry process and the explorer's mindset, the idea of basically what does it mean to learn like you are a National Geographic explorer. And so you can actually, if you are a teacher, they still do these trainings quite frequently. You can go through their process, learn their methodology, learn how they do what they do, their questioning, their inquiry process, and you can get what's called National Geographic certified as a teacher. You kind of go through the process, you go through the class, you do a capstone project at the end where you basically take what you've learned and do it in your classroom. And I really liked it. I thought it was really valuable because inquiry and questions are very central, not just to the work that I did in the classroom and the stuff that I do now, but very central to the stuff that goes on, in informal spaces in our public lands. And so it was a really kind of an interesting way to just kind of learn one more way or one more approach. And it was broken down very, very easily. So if you have no idea what inquiry-based learning is or how to do it, I would suggest you go check it out. I was also really lucky that they still do a fair amount of granting. It's definitely changed a little bit
Sure.
in recent years, but they do offer grants to all sorts of people, including educators or people that work in the education field, where you can like propose a project and go and do it. And I actually did get not one of their big, what they call like their big Meridian grants or their level 1 grants. I got a smaller one that was specifically for creating resources for COVID, and so it was it was like a one-time small grant to produce some curriculum. And what I did was I basically took Google 360 images. Like we've probably all done that Street View thing where you drop the little yellow pig guy in front of your house and you can kind of see like, oh, hey, I don't own that car anymore. You know, whatever it is. Or like that. I remember when my house was that color. So I took that technology and I created a series of what I called virtual ranger talks, where I took 360 images people had shot. And then what I did was I created scripts for teachers to basically share the image with their student on their student devices, because they were doing this during COVID when we were all teaching online. And the students could use the 360 image to see what the teacher was talking about. And so go on like a geology tour of Yosemite, or go on a tour of how climate change is impacting national parks by visiting all of these different places. And it was basically, I think it was selected not just because it was a pretty novel idea, but it was also something that kind of reminded kids that there is still a world out there, even though you're kind of trapped inside. And so I think that's why it resonated with a lot of people. So I did those. Those were a lot of fun. They can still be found on my website. And so that was my National Geographic stuff. UNESCO, interestingly enough, kind of did happen, not the same week, but the same time. In the US, when we had to pivot to online learning, we were very lucky in the sense that like we had a lot of the tools and stuff in place. Maybe some of the processes had to be included, but we have internet, we have devices, we have, learning management systems and emails and all sorts of things that we could draw on in order to be able to keep, doing as best we could with learning. And interestingly, one thing that I saw was some of the students that did the worst in the classroom did the best online because of not just like the flexibility of the reduced workload, the fact that they didn't have to be in a room with other people that were disruptive or like kind of, not people that didn't want to like have to be around. So I'm not everything that, there were some things that I think actually came out of it that were really great. And I think that we should hold on to. It's probably a different interview for another time, but, one group that was really doing some interesting stuff about, if you didn't know how to teach online, like what would you do? And if you were in a part of the world that didn't have the same infrastructure, the same
resources,
and stuff that we did, what would you do? And one of the groups that was really doing a lot of work to try to help folks was UNESCO.
Right on.
They have, specifically their category 4 research, education research partner, which I'm going to get the acronym wrong. The Mahatma Gandhi Institute for Education, Peace, and Sustainability. It's MGIEPS now, but that's a mouthful. But they are located in India, and they are UNESCO's only Category 4 research partner. So they're the only institution that is funded by UNESCO to do research. And their 3 areas of interest are SEL, sustainability, mobilizing youth for sustainability and peace, and the third one is online learning, pedagogy, and technology.
Yeah. And what was the first one you said?
The first one was SEL. It was
what's that acronym for?
Social emotional learning. So it's the idea of like teaching students how to be more in touch and and aware of and moderating their emotions. So it's a big deal, especially in elementary schools right now. And they do a lot of research with it. They have some really fantastic resources. So if you're a teacher or you're somebody who works with students, especially younger ones, highly would recommend you go to their website and check them out, because they have free online courses that you can take that are really kind of helpful. Right. And I found them because I needed to learn more about online education, because at the time I was supporting teachers as their educational technology guy. And I needed to have more resources to give them, especially for the folks that are like, I don't know what to do today. Here's what I would do if I was in person. How do I do that not in person? And so I was looking for help too. And so I took one of their trainings and I really liked it. And then they said, oh, we're going to do like a training, we're going to do an advanced training for folks that have taken the first one. I did that and I really liked it. And then they said, hey, we're going to invite, if anybody's interested in maybe becoming one of our trainers, you can take this course, and based on how you do, we might invite you. And I did that, and I got invited to join their training staff as a master trainer, and I'm the only one from the US, was the only
Wow.
one, was one of two from North America, which makes sense too, because all of the work that we do
Sure.
is essentially on the other side of the planet. And so a lot of the trainings that I
Probably
participated
Southern
in,
Hemisphere as well.
2 a.m.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of our meetings were at midnight. But but like
Makes sense.
you, I really support, and I really admire UNESCO. I really support their mission. I think it's a force for good in a world that could use more of that.
Yeah.
And was really happy that I got to. Was really happy that I'm a part of it and got to be a part of it. I'm not as much anymore, just because there's a lot of other stuff going on, and some things have fall to the wayside. And staying up until 2 a.m. to work with teachers from the Maldives is a real tough thing to do all the time.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I didn't realize UNESCO had that aspect. I was familiar, obviously, with their World Heritage sites and their cultural exchanges and all of that aspect.
Yeah, they
of
do
what
a
they
lot
do.
of really,
I didn't realize
really
that component of it. So thanks for bringing me up to speed on some other aspects of UNESCO. Makes me even more supportive of their global mission to preserve and connect heritage and culture sites and educate folks and
all the fun stuff.
Recognize our differences and similarities and bring us all together around that. That's an important aspect. So
for sure.
Well, jump me into the book then. Jump me into the National Park Classroom. Tell us what that is and how it can be used and how people can get access to it and all of the knowledge that you share.
All the stuff. I'll give you the 10,000 foot view. So the book came out in March. It's published by ISTE, which is the International Society for Technology and Education. I was really fortunate to have a really fantastic book team and a really awesome editor who, when I called up the International Society for Technology and Education and said, I want to write a book about why teachers should teach more like park rangers, they didn't immediately tell me that I was out of my mind, because it's definitely a niche and a thing that on face value, it's like, it seems like a bit of a mismatch. But what's interesting, or what I found, was that there's a lot of things that exemplify. It's not just education that they do. They have a very diverse portfolio. They have their own standards for what education should look like, or what teachers should be doing to make sure that you're providing what they call a future-ready experience for your students. And a lot of the stuff that I wrote about in the book actually aligns very well to their portrait of a graduate or their portrait of a master teacher or whatever. Wow. And so the book itself, I feel like I've been working on it literally since the first time I went to Yosemite, because what I wanted to do was, like I had said, I wanted to distill for a classroom teacher what it is that they could benefit from if they learn more about the pedagogical approaches to teaching and the resources that are produced by public lands. And it definitely, it's something that I would always, nowadays what I do, I work with teachers and school leaders as a trainer and a professional development coach. And when I go and I work with them and I see what they're working on, or I see the kinds of stuff they're developing in terms of curriculum, and I see a connection to one of our national park units, I was like, hey, did you know that if you go to this website, you can download all of these free resources, and all of these images can be just used for free because they're all public domain, and you can, and you've got these videos, and you might even be able to call up the ranger at this site and have them do a virtual visit with your students. They were all really surprised that stuff existed. And then they were also a little bit skeptical of, will it work? Because they're like, well, but park rangers aren't teachers. It's not going to work for me. And it's like, oh, but they are. But they are. I understand why they would say that.
Sure.
But I also understand how incorrect that is. And it's not like, yeah, you dumb classroom teacher, you don't know what you're talking about. It's just, again, you just don't know what you don't know. And, right. And sometimes you make assumptions that are just out there until somebody tells you. And so that's what this book was. It was kind of both ways. I wanted teachers to read it because I wanted them to see all of the stuff they could be doing and all the ways they could leverage this giant educational ecosystem that their tax dollars are paying for. But I also wanted park rangers to look at it, or interpreters is probably the more accurate term, but I'm going to say park rangers just because I can sit here all day debating about titles where we can keep talking. So let's just go with it. But I wanted them to see it too, because a lot of the case studies and a lot of the examples I give in the book could help them to diversify and create educational programs that are more responsive to the kinds of things teachers look for or need. Like
Yeah, nice.
if you are a park ranger, you are an expert in a lot of areas. Education is not always one of them. You don't always talk classroom teachers. It's very, very rare, in fact, that you do find a ranger, especially one that does programming, who has some sort of like formal education
classroom
background.
teaching, yeah.
A lot of times they're either like refugees from that area because they don't want to have to do the classroom. They want to do the fun stuff,
yeah,
which leads them into that, or they just, that's just not their background and not their expertise.
They just evolved into it, right?
Exactly. And so, right. and I don't think you necessarily need that in order to be good at what you do, especially if you're a park ranger or an interpreter. And so I wanted them to have a lot of ideas or things that they could draw on to create better, stronger partnerships. Because when you have a classroom teacher working with a park ranger, the teacher knows the content the teacher knows the learning goals, the teacher knows the students, but the ranger knows the content, like a mile deep. And the two of them working together, it's like the perfect match where they really do balance each other. And I have a ton of examples in the book of like these insanely amazing partnerships and programs and projects that students completed that show just the power of a collaboration like this, and wanted teachers to be able to take advantage of that. And it's all through the lens of project-based learning, which is the area that I work in, is the idea of, instead of just like keeping learning relegated to the classroom and that the students are just they're taking in knowledge and regurgitating it for the purposes of tests. We're going to take that knowledge, they're going to apply it to a real world situation or a real world problem, and what they produce is something that they are going to show or is going to be utilized by the people that are trying to solve that problem or that challenge. Makes the learning more relevant. It really helps them develop and understand like what kinds of opportunities are out there, but like at the end of the day,
matters.
Exactly. That was exactly what I was going to say, was that like you never have to then sit there like I had to do a bajillion times in my classroom and have a kid slumped over on their desk going like, why does this even matter anyways? It's like, well, it matters because this person in the community is waiting for us to finish this project, and you have to learn all of this to complete this project and answer this question. Again, it's a more motivating and I believe a more modern way, a more realistic,
real world
applications
for educating.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
For sure.
I love that.
Yeah.
So the book is available for folks to purchase and just kind of use on their own, but you also, as you mentioned, you're kind of a coach, and people can contact you and use your services, and it looks like you're part of a team that does this as well. You want to talk about that a little bit?
I would love to plug the organization I work for. And so I do my own consulting on the side, but I don't do it but for folks that are really looking to learn more about things like project-based learning or like how they can bring these types of approaches into their classroom, I would actually direct them to the organization that I work for, which is called PBLWorks. We used to be known as the Buck Institute for Education, and now we're PBLWorks, which is, you can find us at pblworks.org, all one word.
Perfect.
It's a nonprofit based out of California, and for the last 35 plus years, it has been, I might be a little bit biased, but they have been the leader in the project-based learning field. I might be biased, but if you Google project-based learning, guess who shows up first? Just saying.
Yeah.
But yeah, they provide services to not just classroom teachers to learn how to do project-based learning and how to bring this approach to their students and develop their own projects. They also coach leaders in schools on how to like shift, for lack of a better term, how to create the conditions needed for teachers and students to be able to do these things. Because we know, we have the research to back it up, that project-based learning works. It works for everybody. We've got the numbers and the research to prove that it does. And and honestly too, like I discovered project-based learning kind of by accident, because it kind of, I had experienced it in high school. I was a part of a small learning community. And so when I started going into the classroom, that's just what I did. Yeah. I didn't actually know it was called PBL until PBLWorks came and trained us at our school. And I was like, this is kind of like what I do. That's what it's called. Yeah. And that's kind of how my whole relationship with them began and how I eventually started to work for them. But if you are a teacher who is out there and you are feeling stressed, you're feeling like the fun has been sucked out of the classroom, if you feel as though you're just always burning the candle from both ends and you're just not getting the results you need, I would highly recommend you check this out, because I'm one of the reasons why I'm passionate about it is I really do believe that number one, I think it's more effective at dealing with a lot of the challenges that you experience, but I also think it's more fun. I really do. Kids enjoy it more. It's more engaging. It allows you to bring your passions and your creativity into the classroom. It allows you to farm out some of the responsibility for teaching by bringing in outside experts or by having the kids presenting for, people in the community. It really is just, I think it's better for kids, but I also think it's better for teachers. And I hope folks take a look at it. And if you want to learn how to do it, there's no better people out there to teach you than PBLWorks.
Just looking at the bios of the team that you're associated with there, I was
they're pretty
super
impressive.
blown away by all. I was like, wow, these are some really cool people.
Incredible people. And from all across the country, all different walks of life, all different expertise. And just interestingly too, like you had asked about things like UNESCO and National Geographic and stuff. A lot of those opportunities I actually found by associating with these people and getting to know the rest of the training staff and just seeing what they're doing. I have no doubt that without that because I was able to work with these people and see what they do and how they do things, that's what eventually led me into writing and got me connected with the co-author who I wrote my first book with. He's a wonderful guy named George Valenzuela, who I am very grateful for kind of taking me under his wing and showing me the ropes of what it means to be a writer and getting me kind of started with that, which has been great. And he's also really accomplished in his own right too. If you look him up online, he does it all, and he does it all very well. So he's a great one to connect with too if you're interested in learning more about things like education and SEL and any of the other topics that I talked about. I would definitely check him out. He's fantastic.
Wonderful.
He's just a good guy too. Like that's the other thing. Is like I just like he's.
You got to start there.
I know, right?
Yeah, if you start there, then everything else can be building upon that. Character, integrity, and being a good person.
Totally. All those
certainly
things are very true. Yeah,
resonates a whole lot further for me than just an arrogant expert in something.
He's definitely not that. He's very approachable and a great person to talk to.
Fantastic. Now, I don't know how all this ties in, but kind of exploring the website and kind of just being impressed by everything that I was looking at and reading. So obviously the National Park Classroom book is there, and the workshops and opportunities to learn from you or connect with you and others. I also saw a portfolio of projects that had a whole fascinating list of indigenous history and water quality and virtual tours and landmark learning and park-based learning. It looks like it's just a full of incredible resources for teachers, and hope folks will go check it out and look at everything that you have to offer. Are those other portfolio projects intertwined within the National Park Classroom, or a little bit, or not at all, or how does that work?
That's a good. There's a whole bunch of stuff. It's kind of like a junk drawer in a way.
Connected a little bit, but I'm not sure.
Some of them are, and some of them are, and some of them definitely aren't. So, for example, when you look at some of the projects that the group has done, and it's an informal kind of collaborative, just like-minded teachers. We've kind of found each other. A lot of the folks I found when I was interviewing them for my book, and we were like, "Oh, you seem like a cool person. Let's see if we can work together and do some stuff to give back, to the parks." And that's kind of what we're doing now. Is there's a group of us that meet periodically, and we try to figure out what are the things that we can do with our expertise. We don't have a ton of money. We're not the Rockefellers. We're not going to just buy large tracts of land or hotels or whatever. But as educators, we have skills that we can use and deploy in service of parks that they do indeed need. Like I've done a lot of curricular planning with some parks, and they're just like, oh yeah, we really needed somebody who understood all of this stuff. And so we've done some of the stuff, and some of those things you're talking about in that projects link are some of the past work that I've done. Like one of them is the National Geographic project I talked about. Another one was a collaboration I did with that I helped design and lead with a teacher that I worked with, and a park up in northern Minnesota called Voyagers. It's actually, the project is fully, you can see the whole thing, and it's fully downloadable online, and it can be done anywhere with any body of water. So if you are one of the, I don't know, I mean, I'm guessing you probably know this, like the 60-70% of people who live in a watershed, maybe it's higher than that. You could do that project with your students. And then also, like, the book itself, if you do purchase the book, which I would love it if people did.
Please,
The
yeah.
book also comes with 63, what I call them, sparks. 63 sparks or ideas for projects that come linked to resources that are connected
Awesome.
to a national park site. I have one
Yeah.
for every national park, and you get
Wow.
all of those with the book as well. But I have some of them online, and you can kind of see those things. So there's a bunch of stuff. It's things that I've done in the past, things that I'll probably be bringing back and revisiting and such. But they're all connected to this idea of getting students opportunities to learn, improve, to connect to their public land so they understand why they're important. And so hopefully they become the next generation of
Stewards.
conservationists that we need in order to make sure that they stay around and don't
Yeah.
get, don't get neglected.
Yeah. Wonderful. And I love that idea of sparks as kind of teaching tools.
Yep.
That's I love that connection
Just to
to
get
that
some
to that
ideas to
idea.
get you started. Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, what haven't I asked you about your book that you want to make sure people know or understand before we transition into your call to action? Is there something that we just need to touch on before we go? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, this could transition into that call for action, because I can give a little preview of it without, it's a little bit of a spoiler, but not a big one, because there's still lots of stuff worth reading. But so part of the reason, and I'll kind of, this is a story that I tell. It's a story that I tell at the end of the book that leads to the call to action. And it is that while I was researching this book, of course, I used it as an excuse to go and visit a bunch of national parks,
Of course.
and call it development time,
Absolutely.
And the job that I have,
right?
Totally. Oh yeah, I have to do it. And so I've been to a few, 310 units to be precise, not to brag. So I've been to a couple, and the job that I have, my 9-to-5 job, it enables me to travel, because I get to travel across the country and work with teachers in their schools a lot of the time. And I was really excited because one day I was assigned to a school in Arizona, and I was like, ooh, I'm going to be in Phoenix. That's only like 4 hours away from the Grand Canyon. I could do that drive. That's no problem. And it's the Grand Canyon. So like, come on, it's the Rolls Royce of national parks. You got to go. And I'm writing a book about it. So I'm like, I'm going to go, I'm going to spend a whole day there. I'm going to do a little bit of walking, sit down and do some writing, interview people, attend. But like, most importantly, because I was working on the chapter about teaching strategies, I'm like, I'm going to find every park ranger program I can. I'm going to find every roving interpreter, and I'm going to just watch what they do, and I'm going to ask them, and I'm going to write everything down, and the whole chapter is going to take care of itself. So I get there, and this is the summer. It's the height of the season. It's there was a little bit of rain that day, but like this is the height of the busy season at the park. And I showed up super excited to write everything down and do all the things. And I was really underwhelmed by what I saw. So the main visitors center, which is like, kind of your first stop when you visit the national park, it was only open for 4 hours. It didn't open until noon. There were ranger programs, but it was very hard to find them because there were only a couple of them for the day. There were no roving interpreters that were there just engaging the public and finding those teachable moments like I expected. And it wasn't just me who was having trouble finding these folks, because we had kids that were trying to do their little junior ranger program. And one of the things you have to do is get a signature from a park ranger. And I can't tell you the number of times that I came to a kid and I was saying like, hey, how's it going? Like, what are you learning? Like, oh, we can't do it because we can't find a park ranger.
Yeah.
And I just started to feel more and more deflated. And I was like, what is going on here? Like, where are all of the learning opportunities? Everything you kind of had to do on your own, which is fine. There are lots of opportunities for that in a national park. But I was really surprised that the human element, that connection that I remember going to Yosemite and going on all these ranger programs, that was missing. And I was really feeling deflated about it when I left. And as I was leaving, I saw there's a place by where the shuttle drops you off that's a free speech zone where people can like hang out and they can like, share ideas or whatever it is. I think it's a great idea to have those, so you don't like, you can avoid like, conflicts over that kind of thing. But it was a guy in a giant Cookie Monster outfit, like the kind that you see in Times Square in New York. And he was trying to get people to take pictures with him. And it struck me that I spent all day in a national park and I saw more Cookie Monsters than I did park rangers.
Yeah.
And are
Ugh.
the kids at the park going to take away that as their experience? That when I went to a national park, Cookie Monster was more available than a park ranger, and that's going to be my experience. And I want to be clear here because I know that sounds like I'm throwing a lot of shade at the park staff, and I'm
No,
absolutely
throwing a lot
not.
of shade at
No.
Congress and those who set
Yes.
budgets and
Thank you. Yeah. And
establish.
that's,
Yeah, the park
yeah. And
rangers
I,
would love to be out there.
yeah, the park rangers were frustrated because a lot of the staff had been diverted because they're in the process of redoing the big pipeline project to bring water into the South Rim, and a lot
Yeah.
of resources have been allocated that way. A
Yep.
lot of them had said like, "Hey, I signed up to be somebody who got to interact with the public, and now I'm just dealing with parking violations all day," or like that
Yeah.
garbage.
Yeah.
I'm not blaming the administrators of the park or the superintendents because, again, like you said, they're dealing with the parameters they're being
They're
given,
doing
and they're
what they
dealing
were,
with the
the
budgets.
policies and the budgets they were
Yeah,
given.
budgets being
Yeah.
set by people who've never visited even, and like they got to do
Yep.
what they got to do. I'm not even giving Cookie Monster a bad time. It was 105
Yeah.
degrees and the guy's in a suit just trying to make money. I'm like,
Yeah.
big ups
He's
to
doing
him as
this.
well.
Yeah.
But it struck me that like we need, and so what it struck me was, and here's my call to action, is that
Yeah.
if education is not, it's always going to get second place and third place when it comes to things like visitor safety and other parts of the experience. And maybe that should. Infrastructure and the safety of visitors at parks should absolutely be prioritized, but education is a priority too. And if it's not going to be something that we can always depend on, that you go to a park and you learn about why it's incredible so that you walk away wanting to protect it, because as the saying goes, we only protect what we know, or we only love what you have
care
to
about.
learn about it to love about it, and you only protect the things that you love, is more or less the quote, I think.
Yeah.
Then somebody else has to take up that mantle and make sure kids are making those connections. And I think teachers are best placed, because if you know that every student that comes up through school is going to learn about national parks, is going to learn about one, and is going to want to go and see it one day. Because again, you don't even have to be a teacher that takes your kids on these field trips. Awareness is the first and the most pervasive barrier to getting people into national parks, not knowing what they are and not knowing how to get to them. Those are the barriers. In some cases, they're even more acute than cost, believe it or not. A lot of people think it's money. It's not. It's just understanding that these are spaces for everyone, that they're important, and that you can go there. If you can remove that barrier, and you can tell them and teach them, when you go to the Grand Canyon, here's what you're going to see. When you go to the Grand Canyon, here's what those layers mean. And the kids come in there knowing all of that. They are going to walk away wanting to be the ones that are the custodians. And so if it's not going to be, if the park staff are doing the best they can, but they can't reach everybody, we need other people to step up. And it should be, in my opinion, I think classroom teachers are the ones that should do it, because, that's my call to action, is that just like, we want to make sure that, and it's nothing that has to be, and it's nothing it's not a political message in any way at all, because if you look at the polls, and we have the evidence to show it, there is one thing that both sides of the political spectrum agree to, and that is that the National Park Service is a worthwhile organization, and that national parks should be protected. I mean, I know there's degrees to it, but the only other like branch or agency in the federal government that gets the same level of like trust and respect as the National Park Service are like those little beagles that are at the airport that are like sniffing people's luggage. Like, people love the Beagle Brigade, but it's like, it's like national parks, beagles, and post office. And so it crosses party lines at a time that is very, very hard to do things like that. And so it's something we could all do, and I think we can all own.
We
even
all
if
have a responsibility to it.
Yeah, even if you're not a classroom educator, if you're just, if you're a parent of a couple of kids and you want to take them to there, like, tell them a little bit about what they're going to be seeing and why they're going to be seeing it before they go, because they'll appreciate it that much more. And we know that leads to them being invested as conservationists later on in life.
Absolutely. I love that call to action. And I would just add, even if you don't have kids or you're someone like me, I mean, it's our responsibility to raise awareness for these amazing places and support those that are keeping them open and keeping them, spaces that are for all of us, and using our voices to do that. So I appreciate that call to action. Thanks very much, James.
Yeah.
Now, let me transition you then into our final little bit here, which is talking about hope for the future. And I address hope not as an emotion, but kind of as how those who study it define it. And hope is a state of mind. It's we can have a vision for a better future, and we can have some steps on how to achieve that better future. We may not know the entire path. We know a direction to at least walk in. And we have a feeling of agency, that there's something I can do to help me get to that vision of a better future. So it's a state of mind that we can cultivate and grow and exercise to generate more hope in our lives and share that with others. So I want to ask you 3 questions about hope, and would ask you not to think too long about it, and to kind of give your first gut reaction, a kind of a precise answer of, hey, this is what my first thought was, or first, from your heart feeling was about it. So the first question for you, James, about hope is, what is your vision for a better future? It can be for you personally or professionally or for the world, but what's your vision for a better future?
That's a great question. So first of all, I do absolutely believe that we are going to continue to have a better future. I think, it's that sometimes we swing one way or another, but that we're always on an upward trajectory, and that things are going to get better. I mean, as a parent, as an educator, as somebody who's just like, a human on this planet, I don't know if I could really function every day and wake up if I didn't think that eventually things are going to get better, and that we are continuingly on an upright trajectory. Sometimes that is a little bit harder to see, definitely, depending on what's going on in the world, things like that. But I do truly believe that, and I think one of the things that really does give me hope is that I do believe that regardless of perceived differences or irreconcilable beliefs, that I think when you're one-on-one with people, and when you actually do sit in conversation with them, that very, very quickly you start to realize there's a heck of a lot more that you have in common than divides you. I know that's been said before, and I know it sounds kind of trite, but I really do believe it. Like, for example, when I work, I go out and I work in the world, and I go all over the country, and I work with all kinds of educators, and I work with all kinds of people with all kinds of beliefs. And I know when I'm going to certain places that I'm going into an area where demographically they are going to be completely the opposite in terms of every single thing that I believe, my values. We don't share a lot of those things, but then I'm able to sit down with them. I'm able to approach them as somebody who's one of their colleagues and as another person, and one-on-one, those differences, they just don't matter. There's so much more, not that some of those beliefs and some of those things don't matter, they do, but there are so many more things that are more important. And so, even, so when I see things on the news, or when I see things on social media that just really get my blood going, I really say, yeah, but if I sat down with this person one-on-one, I'll bet you that we could find a lot of things that we could agree with. A lot of common ground. I think it gets harder and harder as you lose proximity, and as the number of people grow. I think that's what really is tricky. And so that's what gives me hope, is that one-on-one, I really don't, is when you actually sit down and talk with people, that there's always a way to bridge any gap.
Perfect. So the second question, then, you have a vision of this better future where we're connected, we're communicating more, we're finding more common ground. Our divisions are, being melted away slightly through this proximity and communication. I think you kind of already answered it a little bit, but just to give you a chance to expand on that, why is that important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it should be important for everybody, because I think that it reminds you that no matter how bad it is, or how much you're objecting to what's going on this week in the news, or the choices that are being made by leaders here and there, I think that you remember that eventually things are going to swing back the other way, and that we're going to, that hopefully calmer heads will prevail, that those conversations will be taking place, and eventually people will realize, we're going to make a lot more progress working together than if we're working against each other. I also just don't think it's human nature, and I really do believe that. I do believe that in general, and this is probably comes as a result of not just, being a teacher for over a decade and working with kids, but also having 2 of my own. at the end of the day, people want to do good. People want to be good and be seen as good people. I don't
Yeah.
think overwhelming majority of people.
Yeah.
There's of course, are there bad apples in the world? Are there bad people in the world? Obviously, I can't say, oh no, there are those people, but if you it's a book that I read to my kids a lot when they were younger, is that the author talks about how if you took all of the bad people in the world and you put them in one place, you could fit them all into a 6-story building, but if you took all of the people that are good and want to do good things for their neighbors, that you wouldn't be able to find a building to hold them all because they would just stretch on and on and on. And I really do think that that's the truth.
Yeah, I agree.
Even kids who are quote unquote like, oh, these are the bad kids. It's circumstantial. It's a reaction to things that are going on in their lives or their lived experience. It's not the choice that they make. I don't think. I think it's a choice that they're more driven to, or they feel like they have to make. And so, I think recognizing that and having faith in the fact that people do, their pathway to what they think is good might be the thing that gets them in trouble, but no one chooses to be just bad and evil.
Waking up in the morning to see how much damage I can do today. We're waking up to do the best we can with what we got to work with.
Yeah, and I would agree.
Yeah. So last question then for you, James. So imagine now this future you just described where we're communicating more, we're finding more common ground with each other and able to express, our human nature of wanting to do good and finding ways to do that together as opposed to at odds to each other. That future you just described, imagine that's the world we're living in right now. And tell me how that makes you feel.
It feels great. It makes me less anxious as a parent because I know that it's the world that my children are inheriting. I know it's the world that other people's children are going to inherit. It's the world where the truly big problems that we all need to figure out, problems around things like the future of the planet and the environment, making, the future of making sure that people have what they need to live and to thrive, where they're not, where they don't feel they don't feel a constant mindset of inadequacy or a lack of what they need, that leads to things like greed. That goes away and then slides to the side, and we can actually get down to the real big things that we need to work on to make sure that everybody feels better. It's great, and it's a wonderful thing, and something that I certainly hope that I get to see in my lifetime. But I'm confident that it's somewhere down the road.
Perfect. Well, I share your vision and your hope for the future, and I'm going to try to do my little bits as best as I can to help us get there. So thank you so much for doing what you do as well to make the world a better place, James. And thanks for your book and for coming on the show and sharing your journey with us and all that you're doing. And I encourage everybody to go check out your website. I'll put all that information in our show notes so folks can know how to get in touch with you, get to purchase your book and learn more about the consulting and services that you offer as well.
Awesome.
So
thank you
so much for joining me on Stories Sustain Us. I'll leave you with the last word.
Okay. Well, definitely. Thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure to get to be on the show, and I hope lots of folks listen to it and go and check out the things that I looked at. And I would also like to encourage everybody, because I know that summer vacation and road trip season is right around the corner. And if you do end up in one of the wonderful places and spaces that I talk about in my book, take a peek in the gift shop and see, because there are definitely some national parks that are going to be carrying it. And
fantastic.
If you see it and you want to grab it, please do so at a national park, because that way you can keep a little bit more money in there, and there's nothing wrong with parks getting a little bit more money, especially now.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you, James.
Yeah,
I wish you all the best, and I'll keep tabs on your progress and look forward to supporting you any way I can, because what you're doing is really important. Thanks, James.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. Bye-bye.
See ya.
What a conversation. Today, James Fester reminded us that education doesn't have to be confined to four walls. And in fact, it shouldn't be. We explored the value of project-based learning, the untapped educational power of national parks, and how connecting classrooms with community experts and public lands can transform how students see and engage with the world. From inquiry-based learning to the power of place-based history, James is helping redefine what meaningful education looks like in the 21st century. As someone who deeply values education, I found this episode both inspiring and affirming, and I hope you did too. James's message about linking America's best idea, our treasured national parks, with classroom learning really resonates with me. And look, good teachers are at the heart of every thriving community, and I've been lucky enough to know more than just a few incredible ones. For example, Miss Beck, my high school English teacher, if you're listening, I want to say thank you. You made literature come alive and pushed me to think critically. And I also think of Amy and Terry, dear friends of my wife and me, who dedicate themselves every day to shaping young minds with compassion, creativity, and a whole lot of heart. Teachers like them and like James are making a lasting impact far beyond the classroom walls. And James's approach to blending formal and informal education also reminded me of the powerful work I witnessed firsthand during my time with the San Antonio River Authority. Environmental educators like Carrie Merson and Minna Paul, two talented women I had the incredible privilege of working with, brought creativity, empathy, and clarity to complex issues, making environmental education not just accessible, but unforgettable. Their work showed me just how effective interpretive education can be, and James's efforts echo that very same spirit. So I want to thank James for coming on the show today and for all his efforts, which are making the world a better place. And if you're a teacher listening to or watching this episode, I want to thank you as well. Thank you for all you do to make the world a better place. For everyone else, here's what I'd love for you to do today. Support the teachers in your life. Reach out, say thank you, ask how you can help. Partner with a local teacher or school to lead a field trip to a nearby park or historical site. Volunteer your time or skills with an outdoor education program. Or donate a copy of the National Park Classroom to your local school or library. And if you love our national parks, go a step further. Contact your congressional representative and urge them to support robust funding for the national park system. Our parks need resources to stay open, well-maintained, and fully staffed so they can continue to serve not only as treasured public spaces, but as powerful platforms for learning and connection. And after doing all that, be sure to get outside and explore your national parks and community parks and learn your local history as well. Find ways to share it too, especially with young people. You can also support Stories Sustain Us by subscribing to the show, leaving a review, or sharing this episode with your favorite teacher, park ranger, or anyone else who believes in the power of education and our great outdoors. You can also visit storiessustainus.com to learn more and stay connected. As always, I appreciate all your support. And speaking of staying connected, don't miss the next episode coming out on July 1st when we kick off a special 2-week celebration of the show's first anniversary. Yes, I've been doing this for a year now, and it's been an incredible ride. In episode 49 coming out next week, I'll be revisiting some of my favorite moments and memories from the past year. I'd love to hear your favorites too, so please share them on social media and tag Stories Sustain Us on Facebook, X, Instagram, and Blue Sky. I can't wait to see what you think or what you remember as highlights from this past year. And you really don't want to miss next week's episode, because at the end of episode 49, I'll be revealing the name of my very special guest for episode 50, which airs on July 8th. And trust me, you won't want to miss that announcement. I'm super excited and incredibly grateful to have this special guest on the show. Can't wait to air it, but we got to get through episode 49 before we get to that special episode number 50. So come check it out next week. You can check out episode 49 of Stories Sustain Us on July 1st at storiessustainus.com, wherever you listen to podcasts, and on YouTube. As always, thank you so much for being here today. Keep supporting your educators, keep protecting your parks, and keep working to make the world a better place for all. Until next time, I'm Steven Schauer. Take care of yourself and each other. Take care.